The storm rolled in without warning. Clara tightened her scarf as her rental car sputtered and finally gave up halfway up a winding coastal road. The sky above was bruised with thunderclouds, and a salty wind whipped through the pines. Her GPS had long since stopped working, and the last bar of reception vanished just as the engine died. "Perfect," she muttered, slamming the door shut behind her. Her boots crunched on the wet gravel as she scanned the lonely shoreline. No houses in sight. Just the roar of the ocean beyond the cliffs, and a thick wall of fog creeping inland like a living thing. Then, through the mist, she saw a light. Not the flickering kind from a home, but something steady, reliable, a beam sweeping slowly across the sea. A lighthouse. Half hidden by pines, it stood like a sentinel against the storm. With little choice, Clara pulled her coat tighter and walked toward it. The lighthouse loomed taller with each step. Weather-worn bricks, rusted railings, and a front porch littered with tools and wooden crates. She hesitated, then knocked. The door opened before she could raise her hand a second time. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair tucked beneath a wool cap and eyes the color of stormy seas. His shirt was damp from rain, sleeves rolled, fingers blackened with oil or soot. He looked more like a blacksmith than a lighthouse keeper. "Yes?" he asked, voice low but not unkind. "I'm sorry," Clara said, breathless. "My car, it broke down on the road. There's no signal, and—" Well, this was the only light I could see. The man studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. Storm's not letting up anytime soon." Clara hesitated only a second before stepping inside. The warmth hit her instantly. A fire crackled in the corner of the room, and the scent of salt and wood smoke wrapped around her like a blanket. "You live here?" she asked, glancing at the sparse but clean interior. Old wooden beams, sea maps on the wall, and shelves lined with books and tools. "Elias," the man said, offering a simple introduction. "And yes, I take care of the place." Clara nodded. "I'm Clara. I was just visiting the coast for a writing retreat. I didn't mean to barge in." "You didn't," Elias said, already walking toward a corner where an old radio sat. "Coffee?" She blinked. "Sure." As the kettle boiled, Clara sat near the fire, glancing occasionally at the quiet man moving with the calm of someone who had long made peace with solitude. She had come here to escape noise, chaos, and complication. She hadn't expected to find a mystery wrapped in rain and lighthouse beams. The storm had passed by morning, but Clara didn't leave. She told herself it was because the tow truck would take time, or that her car needed a proper inspection, but the truth lingered in quieter places. Something about Elias and the lighthouse pulled at her, like the tide she heard crashing below. Elias had already fixed the car's alternator by the time she woke, and was now outside splitting firewood like it was second nature. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice had weight, every word placed with care, like a carpenter laying down floorboards. Clara offered to make breakfast. The small kitchen had only the basics: eggs, bread, a pan with a cracked handle, but she made it work. Elias didn't say much as they ate, but he thanked her. And for some reason, that felt like more than enough. By noon, the roads were clear, and her car was running. She should have left. But instead, she lingered on the porch, mug in hand, watching the ocean mist rise and peel away. "Thanks again," she said, turning to Elias. "Not just for the car, for letting me stay." He gave a nod, leaning against the railing. "Storms have a way of finding the lost ones." Clara tilted her head. "And are you the keeper of lost things, Elias?" A flicker of a smile tugged at his lips. "Just the light." That should have been goodbye. But 3 days later, Clara returned, with coffee and cinnamon bread from a nearby bakery. "I figured the lighthouse keeper might enjoy something other than canned soup," she joked, stepping onto the porch again. Elias didn't seem surprised. "It's been a quiet few days," he admitted. Too quiet. From that day forward, Clara returned more often, sometimes with stories from her writing, sometimes with nothing but silence to share. She would bring a folding chair and sit beside him as he repaired old lanterns or repainted rusted railings. Other times they'd walk along the cliffs without speaking at all. He never asked her why she came. She never asked him why he let her. One day she noticed a battered wooden box at the back of his storage room, half hidden under a canvas tarp. Its lid was carved with initials she didn't recognize, and inside were sealed envelopes, worn journals, and newspaper clippings. Elias caught her glancing at it once but said nothing. Just close the door. Damn us. The mystery only grew. One rainy afternoon, as she dried her boots by the hearth, Clara asked, "Have you always lived here?" Elias took a long moment before answering, long enough to forget how it felt not to. But she knew there was more. Always more beneath the silence. Still, she didn't press. Because whatever Elias was running from or toward, it was clear that this lighthouse wasn't just a building. It was a choice. And slowly, it was becoming hers too. Clara had grown used to the rhythm of the lighthouse. Mornings began with gulls and gray coffee. Afternoons were marked by the slow hum of Elias working on repairs or organizing the supply shed. And evenings often ended in quiet conversations beside the fireplace, sometimes filled with stories, sometimes only silence and the shifting of logs. But there were things Elias didn't speak of, spaces in his life she had not been invited into. One such space was the cellar beneath the lighthouse. It had an old trapdoor near the back, half covered by a woven rug. Clara had only seen it open once, when Elias thought she'd gone. He had moved quickly, descending with a heavy metal box under his arm. By the time she returned from her walk, the rug was back in place, and Elias was chopping driftwood like nothing had happened. That night, curiosity churned in her chest like storm waves. She tried to dismiss it. Elias was kind, grounded, generous. He helped locals repair boats, delivered food baskets to older residents, and never once asked for praise or pay. But there was a weight in his eyes she couldn't name. A heaviness that had nothing to do with weathered hands or creaky knees. She told herself it wasn't her business, until the man in the black coat showed up. It was a Tuesday, quiet, clear, almost painfully ordinary. Clara had arrived early with fresh lemons for tea and a notebook full of character sketches. But as she turned the bend toward the lighthouse, she saw a sleek, matte black SUV parked awkwardly beside Elias's weather-beaten truck. A man stood near the edge of the cliff, back straight, posture sharp. He was wearing an expensive wool coat, polished boots unsuited for the muddy path. Clara stopped behind a dune and watched. Elias was standing in front of him, arms crossed, face unreadable. The man handed him a silver briefcase, said something low, then turned to go. Elias, didn't move for a long time. When he did, he walked straight toward the cellar entrance. Clara waited until he had disappeared inside. Then she approached quietly, each step on the gravel feeling heavier than the last. The trapdoor was still slightly ajar. From inside came the soft sound of metal latches, something shifting, a creak of old hinges. And then silence. That night, Elias was distant. He smiled as usual, even offered to cook, but he seemed distracted. When Clara mentioned a short story she'd finished, he nodded politely, but his eyes drifted to the window, and his hands were trembling ever so slightly as he stirred the soup. She tried to sleep on the small couch upstairs, but couldn't. Her thoughts kept returning to the briefcase, to the way Elias had looked, like someone carrying too many ghosts. At 2:13 a.m., she rose quietly, tiptoeing across the wooden floor to the trapdoor. It wasn't locked. It should have been. Clara descended the narrow steps, flashlight in hand. The cellar was dry and shockingly organized, lined with tools, old nautical maps, and crates of emergency supplies. But in the far corner, tucked behind an old storm generator, was the silver briefcase. It was unlatched. Inside, instead of weapons or documents, were bricks of money. Dozens of neatly wrapped bundles, 50s, hundreds. Clean, crisp, and stacked like a bank vault. Clara's breath caught. CAC. This wasn't some emergency fund. This was something else. CAC. She closed the lid slowly, hands clammy, heart racing. Suddenly, every moment she'd spent in the lighthouse tilted in her memory. Every quiet gesture, every evasion, every time Elias changed the subject. She returned to the couch and stared at the ceiling until the sun rose. her thoughts louder than the waves outside. The man she had trusted, the man she might have loved, was not who she thought he was, and that terrified her more than the storm ever did. Clara left before sunrise. None, she didn't wait for Elias to wake, she didn't leave a note. The air inside the lighthouse had become too thick with questions, and her chest ached with the weight of what she'd seen. She drove through the mist, past the craggy cliffs and sleeping cottages, all the way back to the little rental cabin she had barely been using. Her hands trembled as she locked the door behind her. Issa's. She wanted to believe there was a simple explanation. Maybe Elias was helping someone. Maybe it was a charitable thing, or money set aside for the lighthouse's maintenance. But nothing about the secrecy, nothing about the man in the black coat or the cold gleam of that briefcase felt innocent. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt like a stranger in her own story. Vina. She tried to distract herself. Brewed tea, cleaned the same cup twice, stared at her laptop but couldn't write a word. Finally, she called her best friend, Nora. I need to tell you something, Clara whispered, her voice already cracking. She told her everything, how they met, the quiet moments, the kindnesses, the briefcase. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Nora said gently, Clara, are you sure it was money? I saw it, Clara said. Stacks. Neat. Organized. Too much to explain away. What if he's part of something? Something illegal? Clara winced. That's what I'm afraid of. Or what if it's not? What if he's just someone who didn't want you to see that part of him yet? That's the problem, Clara said quietly. I don't know what part of him is real anymore. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the wind whistle through the pines outside. Every thought spiraled. Elias's gentle voice, the way he'd always made room for her, the way he handed her tools without asking, the stories he told in fragments, always about others, never about himself. And then, the silence when she'd asked about his past. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Elias. Are you okay? She stared at it for a long time. Didn't reply. An hour later, another ping. If you need space, I'll wait. If you need truth, I'll give it. Still, she said nothing. At 3:12 a.m., her inbox lit up with a new email. Subject: if you're still listening. Clara, if you're reading this, thank you. I don't know where you are. I only know that I hurt you, without meaning to. But that doesn't excuse it. You saw something I hadn't planned for you to see. That briefcase. It's not what you think. But I understand why you left. You were right to. I've spent years trying to be someone without a name, without a title. I walked away from a life built on legacy and expectation, hoping to build something real with my own two hands. I didn't want to be known by a surname or a trust fund. I wanted to be known by the way I showed up, quietly, steadily. Minces, you saw me better than anyone ever has. And maybe that's why it hurts more now. Because what you saw in that moment, the money, the silence, it didn't match the man you thought I was. But I promise you, Clara, I didn't lie to protect myself. I stayed silent because I didn't know how to let someone in and still feel like I was worthy of their love. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand. But if there's still a part of you that believes in what we shared, come back. I'll show you everything. Elias. Clara read the message 3 times, tears blurring the last line every time. And for the first time since she left the lighthouse, her heart cracked open, not from fear, but from the longing to believe that maybe, just maybe, the truth could still be beautiful. The fundraiser was the last place Clara expected to see him. She hadn't planned on going. Nora had insisted, practically dragged her there. It's for a local prosthetics program, her friend had said. Good cause, and you need to get out of your head. So Clara went, half present, half closed off, wandering among the booths and canopies set up on the town green. Children laughed in the background. Volunteers handed out lemonade and cookies. Somewhere near the back of the lot, a tent had been set up for fittings. Brightly colored prosthetic limbs lined up like toys in a candy store. That's where she saw him, Elias, kneeling in the grass beside a young girl missing her left leg, gently adjusting the straps of a new prosthetic covered in painted daisies. He smiled softly as he worked, murmuring encouragement. His sleeves were rolled, his hands steady and patient, as if nothing in the world mattered more than making sure the fit was right. For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. He looked lighter somehow, but also more burdened, like someone carrying the weight of his past, but no longer hiding from it. He glanced up, their eyes locked. Time stilled. He didn't move, didn't smile. He simply looked at her with a quietness that undid her, like he'd been waiting all this time but hadn't expected her to return. She walked toward him, slow but steady. Minshi. When she reached the edge of the tent, he stood, wiped his hands on a rag. They stood face to face with no one else seeming to notice the world that had just stopped turning between them. "You look well," he said gently. "So do you," she replied. A silence stretched between them like the sea between ships. Clara took a breath. "Was it real?" she asked, voice tight. Everything before the briefcase. Before the silence. Was any of it real? Elias looked down. His jaw tensed. When he looked back up, his voice cracked just slightly. "It was the only real thing I've had in years." She swallowed. "Then tell me the rest. No more hiding." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Come with me." They drove in silence, the town slowly falling behind them, replaced by winding roads flanked with tall trees. Eventually, they arrived at a modest one-story house tucked behind a thicket of wild pine, unremarkable at first glance. Inside was warmth, simplicity, bookshelves overflowing. A long wooden table covered in papers and envelopes, photos of smiling children, medical reports, blueprints. "This is where the money goes," Elias said quietly. "The briefcase. The trust. The fund." Clara stepped closer. The photos were real. Children with new limbs, letters of thanks, clinic buildings under construction, small towns with banners that read, "Thank you for helping us walk again." "I started this 5 years ago," he continued, anonymous. "I didn't want it to be about credit. I wanted to help and disappear." Her voice came out in a whisper. "But why the lighthouse? Why all the secrecy?" Elias sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on knees. "Because I was born into a name that opens doors I didn't build. Because I was tired of being someone people assumed they understood. I wanted to find out who I was without the noise. So I left it all. Came here, took over the lighthouse no one cared about, and started fixing things, one at a time." Clara sat beside him slowly. "You could have told me." "I wanted to. But then you mattered more than the lie. And by then, I didn't know how to tell the truth without risking everything." Her throat tightened. "I didn't leave because of the money, Elias. I left because I didn't know who I was falling in love with." He looked at her, eyes soft, raw. "I never wanted you to fall for anything other than the man who burned soup and got rust on your windowsill." A long silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. But it wasn't the same kind of silence they had before. This one had space for healing. Clara leaned forward, brushing her fingers over a photo of a little boy hugging a volunteer with a new prosthetic leg. "You didn't need to prove anything," she said softly. "Maybe not," he replied. "But I needed you to know everything, and still stay." Weeks passed, but this time, they passed differently. Clara didn't return to the lighthouse in a storm, or with doubts in her heart. She came by choice, by trust. Each visit layered onto the last. Slow conversations over tea, long walks along the shore, quiet dinners that didn't need to fill the silence because it had already been healed. Elias didn't push. He didn't try to win her back with grand gestures or apologies repeated like vows. He just showed up, honest, present, steady. Clara brought her sketchbook now, and sometimes sat on the steps of the lighthouse drawing while Elias sanded wood or repaired railings. They would take breaks to share sandwiches or peel oranges, and sometimes she would rest her head on his shoulder without saying a word. One evening, Elias invited her to a gathering just outside of town, a simple charity gala held inside an old repurposed barn. String lights crisscrossed the rafters, and hand-painted signs marked donation tables and silent auction items. There were no velvet ropes, no photographers, no CEOs, or polished speeches. Just people. People Elias had helped. People Clara now knew. Elias wore a jacket for once. No tie, boots still scuffed. Clara wore a navy blue dress that shimmered slightly when she moved. She felt like herself again, but more. Like someone who had been cracked open, reshaped, and now stood stronger because of it. Mayoff. As the night wound down, Elias stepped onto the small stage. Clara tilted her head, confused. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice soft but firm. "This project started quietly, because I believed that kindness doesn't need credit to be real. And I still believe that. But tonight, I'd like to use this moment for something personal." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara's breath caught. Elias's eyes found her. "The first time I met Clara, she was standing beside a broken-down car in the middle of a rainstorm. She apologized before asking for help." Light laughter stirred the barn. "I gave her a card that said, 'Lighthouse 37 feet,' and assumed I'd never see her again." He stepped off the stage, walking slowly through the crowd toward her. But she came back, and with every visit, every silence we shared, every cup of burnt coffee and every storm we sat through, she reminded me what it meant to be seen. When he reached her, he pulled something small and folded from his jacket pocket. He didn't kneel, he didn't hold a ring box. He simply offered her the same kind of card he'd once handed her on that rainy day. In the same handwriting, it read, "Still Lighthouse 37. Still yours, if you'll have me." Clara stared at it, then looked up at him, eyes glassy. "Your hands were shaking the first time I met you," he said. "Because your brakes were failing. If they're shaking now, let it be because you're nervous about forever, and let me hold them for every day of it." Clara smiled, tears spilling freely now. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling. "I've always been yours." He wrapped his arms around her as the room filled with quiet applause and music resumed. Nothing grand, nothing choreographed, just real. Just enough. Under the soft barn lights and the smell of wildflowers and cinnamon bread from a nearby table, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Home. The wedding wasn't in a cathedral or a ballroom. It was held in the garden behind the small Hearts and Hands headquarters Elias had quietly funded for years. The same place where Clara had first seen him kneeling beside a child, adjusting a prosthetic arm painted with stars. Now that garden was strung with paper lanterns and fairy lights, swaying gently between the trees. Wildflowers lined the path, lavender, daisies, soft bluebells, collected by volunteers and townspeople who'd once received help from the quiet man with grease-stained fingers. There were no tuxedos, no gowns embroidered with crystals. Clara wore a simple white dress with a ribbon around her waist, her hair tucked with fresh lavender. No veil. Just her. Elias stood at the end of the aisle in a gray vest, sleeves rolled to the forearms. No ring on display, just calloused hands that had fixed boats, lanterns, and hearts. The guests were not celebrities or CEOs. They were people from town. An elderly woman with a walker, a teenage boy with a mechanical knee, a single mother holding a baby close to her chest, and a dozen others who knew Elias not by title, but by the way he had shown up for them when no one else did. When Clara walked down the aisle, there were no gasps, no flashes of cameras, only warmth, only real. The officiant smiled gently and began the vows. Clara went first. "I promise to listen, even when I'm tired or frustrated," she said, voice firm but emotional. "To love you not for the stories you tell, but for the ones you're still afraid to. To walk beside you, even when the road is muddy or steep. And to always, always keep the coffee warm, even when I forget the sugar." Laughter and sniffles danced softly across the crowd. Elias took her hands, his voice a little huskier than usual. "I promise to tell the truth, even when it's hard," he said. "To show up, not just in storms, but in the stillness after. To build a life not out of walls and roofs, but out of choices, kindness, and shared silence. And to let you be the light keeper when mine flickers." Then, just as the officiant was about to close, he paused and said, "Before I pronounce you husband and wife, Elias has something he'd like to say." Elias turned to the guests. "For most of you, I've just been Elias the mechanic, the guy who helped fix your brakes. Or showed up with soup. Or forgot to send an invoice. Soft chuckles rippled through the chairs. But the truth is, I'm the founder of this organization. I'm still the chairman of the board. I've just chosen a different way to live. He looked at Clara again. I didn't want to be loved for my name. I wanted to be loved for the way I held a wrench. Or how I burned toast. Or how I can't ever remember where I put the extra batteries. More laughter, deeper this time. I wanted to be someone real. And then, you showed up. You taught me that hiding isn't the same as being honest. And that love, real love, doesn't need perfection, just truth. He pulled out a folded note, the same kind he'd handed her the day they met. It read, "To the girl who found the man behind the lighthouse, thank you for showing me I didn't need to disappear to be free." The officiant smiled again, his voice rich with joy. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Elias, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft, slow, filled with promise, not of fairy tales, but of something stronger. A life. As they turned to face the crowd, still hand in hand, Clara leaned close and whispered, "You never had to prove anything to me." Elias smiled, eyes glinting under the lantern light. "Maybe not, but I needed you to see all of it and still stay." She kissed his cheek. Always. The evening drifted into celebration. Barefoot children dancing in the grass, old friends raising glasses of lemonade, stories traded under strings of lights and stars. Clara looked around and saw not just a wedding, but a legacy. Not one written in gold leaf or marble, but in repaired bicycles, repainted fences, and warm hands extended in silence. And at the heart of it all, Elias. Her lighthouse keeper. Her home. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.